Welcome to another episode of the Left of Lansing podcast with Pat Johnston. A progressive insight into Michigan's political and cultural world. And of course, an entertaining podcast designed to shine a light on how to make Michigan's political machine work for the people. Now, from the Left of Lansing headquarters, located in his attic, here's the award-winning Pat Johnston.
Yeah! Welcome to another installment of Michigan's premier progressive podcast. I am Pat Johnston, and coming up here in a few moments, I'm fired up to speak with my good friend from the progressive group known as Distill Social. That's Gina Keller, and she'll be talking about what they've been up to, her reactions to the ever-changing political whirlwinds that we've been experiencing here for the last few weeks, and we'll talk about her podcast known as Point of Disorder. So that's coming up here in just a bit. But wow, I have to admit, I didn't think this would happen, but it has happened. Vice President Kamala Harris picked Minnesota Governor Tim Walz to be her running mate atop the Democratic presidential ticket. And as we saw from their rollout in Philadelphia this week, the energy is palpable for Democrats, and Harris understood that in order to keep this energy going here for the next 3 months or so, picking someone with good, common sense, progressive Midwest values was the wise choice to make. What Harris did kind of goes against what many D.C. Democratic consultants have done election after election, which is where they pick some milquetoast moderate Democrat to be the VP pick. I mean, think about it. Joe Lieberman. Yeah, what a winner there, right? John Edwards? Okay, moving on. Tim Kaine? Ugh. Now, Barack Obama was the change candidate in 2008, and he decided to go with Senator Joe Biden, who didn't have, say, the biggest progressive record, but Joe back then could fight. He was a fighter, and he would fight for the person that he backed. And Joe knew Washington, and he also knew the Senate, so it made sense. Also, Joe saved Obama's presidency from being a one-term presidency by giving a great debate performance after Obama flopped against Romney in that first debate in 2012, if you remember. Joe was a fighter, and I remember celebrating when Obama did pick Joe Biden. So, okay, that was a decent pick, but up until now, I would say Joe was the best VP pick of my lifetime, and of course, Joe turned out to be the most progressive president, at least on the domestic side of my lifetime, and probably the most progressive since LBJ on the domestic side, and JFK, and especially FDR. But what Kamala Harris did was brilliant strategy. And it's also a move signaling how populism is sweeping up the country. To run against that populism and not harness its energy would have been a big and drastic mistake for the Harris campaign. Now, last week, I talked with Michigan Advance's Susan Demas on the possibility of Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer being the VP pick. And look, when I studied Tim Walz's record as governor of Minnesota against Whitmer's record here in Michigan, they are similar in many ways. I mean, let's review here real quick, okay? Because during her tenure in office, Whitmer has overseen the legalization of marijuana, abortion rights enshrined in the state's constitution, the elimination of many of those MAGA Republican trap laws designed to make it more difficult for women to get reproductive and abortion care, civil rights expansion for LGBTQ plus Michiganders, making the state carbon-free by 2040, helping farmers keep their lands by participating in large-scale wind and solar energy projects because, again, Democrats care about property rights. She also signed on to allowing the state to enact stricter environmental standards than the feds do. She signed legislation eliminating child marriage, eliminating the hurtful and unscientific gay conversion therapy. She repealed the union-gutting right-to-work-for-less law. She restored prevailing wage. She made it easier for people to vote. She signed sensible gun safety laws, made it harder for domestic abusers to purchase guns. She passed the Working Families Tax Credit so people will have more money in their pocketbooks. She repealed the MAGA Republican retirement tax. She allowed homeowners to install clean energy devices like solar panels because, again, Democrats care about property rights. She also got rid of that failed third-grade reading law and enacted free meals at public schools for kids. That's just some of the popular, freedom-based policies that Gretchen Whitmer and the Democrats have championed here in Michigan for the last 2 years. And it's many of the same popular, freedom-based, and progressive policies that Tim Walz has passed in Minnesota as well. Now, some places where Tim Walz and Minnesota Democrats went a bit further than what has happened here in Michigan. Okay, here's one. Walz signed legislation directing $1 billion into housing, and half of that is being spent on affordable housing. And look, we desperately need affordable housing all across the state of Michigan, and Democrats in the state legislature are hopefully getting back to work in September on a bill directing $1 billion to affordable public housing from that corporate slush fund known as SOAR. Enough with the corporate handouts. Let's start giving some help to the people. Also, this is something else I hope Michigan Democrats will do. Tim Walz signed a bill known as the Taylor Swift bill that, as the Independent UK reports, guarantees people buying tickets online for concerts, sporting events, and other live events in Minnesota more transparency and protection. The introduction of the law was prompted by the frustration that Walz felt at not being able to buy tickets to Swift's 2023 concert in Minneapolis. So, look at that. The man knows politics because he knows common sense. He made the Swifties and thousands of other Minnesota music lovers out there ecstatic by signing that bill into law. And it just goes to show you why passing these kinds of freedom-based, common-sense, progressive bills have made him a popular governor in a purple state, just like Big Gretch here in Michigan. People want to know that you're fighting for them. It's not enough to point to Dear Leader Trump and J.V. Vance. Yes, I'm calling him J.V. Vance since that's what he really is compared to the former varsity coach, Tim Walz. But listen, it's not enough to point to the MAGA side and say, they're scary. Look, I'm not saying that we ignore their weird, warped, insurrectionist, fascist stances. Of course we have to do that each and every day. But I think why the Harris-Walz campaign has infused so much energy with the people is because they're giving the people a contrast, not just in style, but in policy. With Harris picking Walz, progressive values and policies are in the spotlight, and they've got a good track record of success. Plus, these policies are a hit with the people because they help people. And Tim Walz is able to express and illustrate how those policies help people in the state and how it could help even more people throughout the country. And Tim Walz is a happy warrior, just like Kamala Harris. Look, I can't wait to watch him debate J.V. Vance and shine a light on his weirdness, but also to shine a light on J.V. Vance's fake bravado and life story. Now, Vance arrived here in Michigan, and he showed up here just hours before Harris and Walz were to arrive for their huge rally at Metro Airport. Now, I'll share a link to Vance's appearance, but when you see the video, you're going to laugh because I think I saw more people crowded around my neighbor's kid's lemonade stand the other day than I saw at Vance's appearance. Anyway, WWJ's Charlie Lawton asked Vance what makes him happy, what makes him smile. And well, I'll play the short clip of J.V. Vance's response. Listen.
Well, I smile at a lot of things, including bogus questions from the media, man. I mean, look. I think if you watch a full speech that I give, I actually am having a good time out here and I'm enjoying this. But look, sometimes you got to take the good with the bad. And right now I am angry.
I mean, he could have said his kids or his wife make him smile, or soft serve ice cream, or the hideous Diet Mountain Dew that he apparently likes. Or, he could have said he smiles seeing Michigan football getting investigated since, he's from Ohio. That would have made sense. It would have been good. It would have been a human response. He had so many options, but he failed. However, though, you did hear his last sentence in which he declared, "I am angry." As you know, I worked in the news talk radio format for years, and all of it in right-wing talk radio. There is no joy. I'm talking absolutely no joy on that side whatsoever. I'll never forget the day when I was there at work and former Milwaukee MAGA loon Sheriff David Clark was guest hosting on one of the right-wing shows my former employer used to air in Saginaw. It was a syndicated show. I can't remember if it was Rush Limbaugh or Glenn Beck. I don't remember, but it doesn't matter. But what I didn't forget is that he rattled off three things. David Clark rattled off three things that he wanted to share with his listeners. Why? Because these three things made him very angry. He stressed that over and over. This makes me very angry. He voiced out what right-wing talk radio is all about. Being angry at someone or something, feeling like you are always the victim, at all times during each and every day. These people are perpetually joyless. It's why they attack Kamala for laughing. It's why Dear Leader never laughs. So that's MAGA land in a nutshell. They're bred to be angry at any and everything. It's why they have so much hatred for those they're supposed to be helping. It's why J.D. Vance sells out to billionaire fascist tech bros to gain wealth and power while laughing at all of us. That's why they are so incensed at how effective Tim Walz's "they're weird" message is with voters. They are so incensed that something so simple is resonating with millions of people out there. Because these MAGA guys have always been weird, even going back to their Tea Party days. Remember? Tri-corner hats, Lee Greenwood's horrific song, and threatening violence against people who just wanted to see their kids stay on their health insurance until age 26. I mean, you remember those days of the Tea Party, all right? It was the harbinger of the MAGA movement. These people are always weird, and what they hate about calling them weird is because it is the truth. That's why Walz's joke about Vance getting off the couch stung MAGA world so much and the corporate media world so much. Yes, we know Vance didn't have sex with the couch. But what made the joke land was that Walz knew the weirdness of Vance makes it funny in the first place. You see, Walz is a normal guy helping normal, everyday people. Vance is bankrolled by billionaires like Peter Thiel and Elon Musk. You tell me, who represents America more? Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, or Donald Trump and J.D. Vance? And to my MAGA listeners, you know deep down that Trump and Vance do not represent America. By the way, Michigan just had its primary this week, and some big races are now set in stone, including the race to succeed Democratic Senator Debbie Stabenow. Democratic Congresswoman Elissa Slotkin easily dispatched of her primary challenger, Hill Harper. And I have to tell you about Harper, I never got the feeling or the sensation that Harper was in it to win it. I never got exactly what he was doing in his campaign. Plus, his stance against raising taxes on the rich always baffled me. So it was kind of a losing situation no matter what. So Slotkin takes on Republican Florida Mike Rogers, who ran away with his primary race. Florida Mike made it back to Michigan in time to not only run for the Senate seat, but to register to vote. So good for you there, Mike. He's put his arm around Dear Leader Trump, which is such an embarrassment, really, such an embarrassment for Rogers, who once used to criticize Dear Leader, but then he realized he had to kiss Dear Leader's ring, and now he has to live with it for the next 3 months. In the State House, there was one upset, and that's MAGA white Christian nationalist nutjob Neil Frisky. He lost his primary for the 107th district. Frisky is being investigated for an incident, if you recall, involving guns and entertainment dancers in Lansing. And he's also the guy who voted against banning child marriage in Michigan. So good friend Democrat Jody Decker will now face businessman Parker Fairbairn in that race. Parker Fairbairn. And in Livingston County, Republican Bob Bazat lost his primary race. He was accused, by the way, of abuse by his wife during divorce proceedings, so he's gone. And in Ottawa County, the right-wing MAGA Christian nationalist majority on the county board there, known as Ottawa Impact, lost its majority in primary races against so-called mainstream Republicans. So MAGA Republicans in Michigan seem to be in complete disarray, and it's all thanks to their Dear Leader Trump. But while they're in disarray, Michigan Democrats and progressives are pulling together to help the Harris-Walz ticket win in the state. In fact, a new NPR Marist poll shows that Harris is now leading Trump by 3 percentage points, and Harris has increased her lead with black voters from 23 points just 2 weeks ago to 54 points now. Wow. Now, it is early, and we've got a long way to go. We still have another, I think, week and a half until the Democrats have their convention. So long way to go, but it feels good right now. And this will only help us in down ballot races across the state. Joining me to talk more about Michigan politics and the Michigan progressive movement is Gina Keller with Distill Social right after this quick break. Oh, and let me say a quick thank you to my good friend Rich for all of his hard work with leftoflansing.com. You're listening to LOL,
a podcast devoted to intelligence, sanity, and freedom, or otherwise known as progressive politics. It's Left of Lansing with your host, Pat Johnston. Need to tell Pat where he's wrong? Or do you actually want to praise Pat? leftoflansing@gmail.com is how to reach him. Here's Pat.
said before, one of the main reasons I started this podcast was not only to find a way to bypass the corporate media structure that's been bent on silencing or at least limiting progressive voices, especially those in the news talk radio format, but I started this to also highlight those working hard on the front lines of the ever-growing progressive movement that's happening here inside the state of Michigan. And one of those people or groups is Distill Social, which continues its meteoric rise as a major player in not only Michigan's progressive political wing, but also Michigan's entire political scene in general. It's been a year since I last talked with Gina Keller, co-founder and digital director of Distill Social, and I just wanted to catch up with her and talk about all the work that they do to effectively reach so many progressives and independents through digital media, and how they develop ways to help connect progressives throughout the state through strategy and messaging. Plus, Gina, along with some of her friends, also created a new podcast that I absolutely love. Please subscribe to it. It is called Point of Disorder, and it's something you should check out. They get some fantastic guests, but what I love the most is their insightful and funny back and forth banter about politics of the week, whether it be here in the state or across the nation. So they've been a little busy over there at Distill Social, and they're not slowing down, as we're going to hear right now from Distill Social's Gina Keller. Hey, Gina, how are things going?
Hey, Pat. Good. Thanks for having me on today.
In case some people out there may not know much about Distill Social, maybe you could talk a little bit about it, how it was formed, and maybe what the ultimate purpose of Distill Social is all about.
Yeah, happy to chat about that. Distill Social, it's funny. My other co-founders and I were all kind of working on other projects prior to 2020, but we were all working in this space of activists in Michigan. And after the 2020 election, I was approached to create Distill Social with a good friend of mine who was kind of like, we get these 5-page press releases and we're asked to help spread the news, but nobody wants to read this. I'm like, yeah, exactly. And we were literally talking about how can we distill this down to that little sound bite or, that one line people need to take away with them. And that's kind of where we came up with Distill Social. We said, we see something that needs to exist that doesn't, let's just create it. It'll really complement what we're doing with our other activism. And I said, all for it, but I want to focus on social media. We know we have a really good ground game through grassroots volunteers that we've kind of procured in our other organizations. But what we don't have is really strong progressive social media in Michigan. We just didn't feel like we were there yet. So I was brought in because I've had over 10 years of digital organizing background, and I've been able to grow online groups to millions of followers. So we kind of hit the ground running. We knew what we wanted to do. We were already really seasoned in our fields, and we were like, let's go, and it resonated because in the first 2 years, we had already created an online community with well over 100,000 people in it, reaching millions of views a month online. So yeah, it resonated. We like to say, we like to tell the news to people in a way where it's like you're at a bar, sitting with your friend, just having a chat over a beer. That's how we kind of dish out the political tea. And it's easy for people to kind of get interested and want to learn more when you're talking to them a certain way. On the flip side of that, we recognize there's a whole lot of very disengaged people in Michigan. How can we give these folks an easy on-ramp to want to come into the fold and learn a little bit more? And I'm like, well, TikTok. We got to start making TikToks. And that's kind of where our platform grew the fastest, actually. So yeah, we have about 100,000 TikTok followers currently, progressive Michiganders who are interested in seeing the things on the far right being exposed. So yeah, we're thrilled where we are right now.
Who were you trying most to connect with when you decided to get this all going? Were you hoping to connect with voters who may not be following politics as much, or were you also trying to engage younger voters, or all the above, I guess?
Yeah, Pat, it's all the above. Through focusing on things like TikTok and Instagram Reels, we really wanted to talk to like the millennial and the Gen Z and the disengaged voters. You know, they tell you meet people where they are. Well, we know these groups consume their news online. So I call it my digital door knocking program, right? It's like, I'm going to get to every account I can in Michigan with a message, and I'm going to have you watch my video, and then I'm going to turn that view into a vote. That's the plan.
Since you brought up TikTok, I hope you don't mind if I go off on a little tangent with this next question, but it's something that I've talked about here on the podcast many times, and it's this movement to ban TikTok that really, really gets my ire up at times, especially when I see that some Democrats in Congress are part of this effort. I'm against that for so many reasons. I mean, free speech, that's just for starters, of course, but TikTok is such a vital tool in reaching young voters. You guys obviously are aware of that. Governor Whitmer's team is obviously aware of that because of how they utilize TikTok. Is that frustrating when you see some people, especially even on the Democratic side, try to ban TikTok, essentially?
Oh, it's infuriating. It really is. Because their arguments against TikTok are not valid. Okay, I understand you're worried about our data being stolen or whatever it is, but I feel like the focus, and through watching the goofy congressional hearings, if it wasn't a company that originated in China, we wouldn't be having this conversation, right? Because it's all the same things are going on Meta and the other platforms. You know, we're all on Twitter, which is essentially foreign owned. I mean, can we really say that's an American company now?
Right.
You know, look at Van, right? The database Democrats use in this country to do their voter outreach stuff, non-American owned. I mean, and that's really critical data on there. And if you want to trace back the roots, right? So this is a company out of the UK that owns Van, but who holds the most shares in that company? Well, it's Saudi Arabia. So I feel like it's a disingenuous argument. Also, look who got on TikTok in the last few weeks, okay? Kamala Harris, as soon as she took the nomination, essentially, right on there with the TikToks. J.D. Vance just started his own TikTok. It's like everyone from both sides is now campaigning on TikTok, but our government wants to ban it at the same time they're campaigning on it. It just makes no sense.
That's a great point. I'm supposed to worry about what's happening with TikTok and the information they're getting from me, but it's okay. Don't worry about what X is doing. Don't worry about what Instagram is doing. Don't worry about what Facebook is doing. Don't worry about the Google. Just worry about TikTok. It is such a disingenuous stance by many of those who are trying to ban TikTok, which I think essentially is to just get rid of it because young people are sharing news. Young people are mobilizing through TikTok. And I think that's one of the main reasons why you're seeing many in the political establishment and sadly some of the Democrats that we just talked about join in this effort. All right. Well, enough of my tangent there on TikTok. You guys at Distill Social refuse to slow down. And we're recording this interview. I'm going to let everybody know on Wednesday morning because you guys are heading out to attend the big rally for Kamala Harris and Tim Walz later on in the Metro Detroit area. I read that Governor Whitmer, Lieutenant Governor Garland Gilchrist, Senator Stabenow, UAW President Shawn Fain, I think, is going to be there along with many fired up Michiganders. Now, you guys tend to attend many of these events. So what are you expecting to see? And, what kinds of questions will you be asking some of the people who are attending this rally?
This rally is going to be very different. I mean, first of all, within the first 24 hours of it being announced, well over 45,000 Michiganders registered for this event. So we're going to go into an event that's going to have a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of energy, with the new nomination of the vice president with Tim Walz. It's just going to be a fun day, really. We do go to a lot of these rallies on both sides. And I have to say, this is the one I've been looking forward to most.
What a difference 2 weeks can make, right? I mean, really. Look, my political predictions are 50-50, and so is my political intuition. But after that debate in late June, I just had that feeling that we our side that we were in trouble in the polls. We were struggling already in the polls, especially here in the state. And Gina, I wasn't just looking at the presidency. And when I made my views known on social media, there were some on our side who would attack me and say, well, that's it. I'm not following you anymore. You want Trump. And that wasn't my point. The reason I started this podcast, too, was I wanted to help try to get Democrats to get control of the state legislature again, something that really had never really happened in my lifetime. I saw that Joe Biden was probably going to be a drain, and it was showing that was going to be a drain on the down ballot Democrats. But since he's made that right decision to step aside, it is amazing how quickly this race has turned. It really has. I mean, and I know that there's so much more time to go, of course, but you talk to people inside the movement. It feels like, and the polls are already showing it too here in Michigan, that people simply just wanted something a little different. And I think they wanted a messenger who was a bit younger and who understood not only what this fight is about, but how to fight it. I mean, what are you hearing?
Yeah, people just wanted something they could really be enthusiastic about. And unfortunately, I believe Joe Biden did an amazing job in these last 3.5 years. Mm-hmm. The most progressive president of my lifetime. When you look at all the legislation he's been able to pass, without him doing what he did these last 3 years, we would not be as well positioned as we are today. All of that being said, because of the debate performance and his age, and then what's happening in the Middle East, there was a lot of malaise around Joe Biden. It's unfortunate, but like you said, he did the right thing. And now we have a ticket where people are energized. People are excited to vote for these two people. It's turned the ship around. So I'm so thankful that he made that really selfish choice and decided to kind of hand the reins over to Kamala Harris.
What's your take on Minnesota Governor Tim Walz being picked as her running mate?
Oh, I'm thrilled. So thrilled. Tim was my choice. When we were looking at that pool of 4 or 5 candidates, I immediately went to Tim Walz and I said, this is the guy. And I couldn't be happier that she picked it. Kind of gives us progressives a little bite at the apple, because I know some folks on our side of the spectrum were kind of feeling left out. Like, okay, we'll vote for you, but we feel taken for granted. Tim Walz is able to join the ticket and take that issue away from the ticket. So I'm so happy for it.
I've said that Walz has accomplished, for the most part, what Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer has accomplished. And not only that, but, they both got that Midwest charm thing down pretty good, too. Yeah. So I said, if I couldn't get Big Gretch to be the VP pick, that's kind of who I wanted, because I thought that would have been a great contrast, really, to J.D. Vance and all that. But hey, if I couldn't get Big Gretch, then Tim Walz was a really good second choice for me, because I really do. They have passed many of the similar policies in Minnesota and here in Michigan.
Let's see. Feeding children in school, codifying reproductive rights, bills to keep our LGBTQ friends and family safe. It is all very similar. Tim did that wonderful thing for the Swifties and kind of working to make sure that there's no price gouging in tickets. So Tim's got that on us, but I'm sure if we talk to Big Gretch, she'll get something going. Yeah, I mean, their records are just pure, right? Like, everything they're doing to make the lives of their constituents better. And we know Tim will bring that into the White House.
I think this was great for our side as well, because it shows, both in Minnesota, what they're doing there, and what we're seeing here in Michigan, is that these progressive policies, that they are pretty popular with the people. And it's no wonder that both Gretchen and Tim Walz enjoy really good approval ratings within the states. So that's why I'm always laughing when I'm hearing some on the national side saying, oh boy, is he too progressive? You know what? Well, please, I want to hear somebody say, no, we should not be giving food to public school children. I'd love to hear that argument.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the Republicans say that every time they vote against it. So right. It's ridiculous. We have 2 very normal, good people running on one ticket, and on the other ticket, we've got a con man, a rapist, and a felon, and a weirdo. So it's like, this should be an easy choice in November.
Well, you brought this up, so I want to make sure I ask about it, because you guys attend so many rallies that are for the Democrats or progressives, but you also attend many MAGA rallies. And I love the videos that you post, because it just kind of gives us a little insight in what the MAGA voter is thinking about. So, and I give you guys a lot of credit for going there and talking with them and then sharing your discussions with those fantastic videos that you guys share. Why do you like going to those events? And maybe more importantly, Gina, what do you learn from talking with MAGA voters?
Yeah, good question. Why do we go to those events? We do think it's really important that we kind of expose the rhetoric on the other side. A lot of our elected officials on the right do a good job of pretending they're somewhat normal people. And then when they're kind of in their own zone and feeling comfortable amongst themselves, their rhetoric changes greatly. So, like, for instance, people might feel like, oh, State Representative Donnie Steele, she's a pretty moderate person. We can all get behind her. Well, no, then you go and see her at a MAGA event and have a conversation with her, and you are like, wow, this chick is whacked. Like, it's insane. I was at a MAGA fundraiser where she pulled me into a dark coat closet because I asked her a question.
What?
And she wanted to talk about it privately. And I'm like, this is weird. Like, why am I standing in a coat closet with no lights on while she's ranting, anti-choice rhetoric? It's just like, we need to let the average person on the street know these people are not safe for the majority of Michiganders, right? If you're not a well-to-do white person who's Christian, this isn't your party, like, it's just necessary. And we love comparing the rhetoric we hear on both sides. Like, for instance, last night, Elissa Slotkin won her primary, Mike Rogers won his primary. If you listen to the two speeches each gave last night, very, very different rhetoric. Elissa Slotkin spoke of working for all Michiganders. She wants to help everyone. Mike Rogers immediately took to culture wars and buzzwords, right? Where he's talking about China in his speech last night. It's just very strange. We like just to get that out there. Everybody needs to know. Do we enjoy going to the MAGA events? Probably not. But through talking to people there, what I can tell you is most of the people who attend the MAGA stuff really believe what they're being told. And that hurts my heart because we know these talking heads are lying to these people and they really feel like they are on the right side.
Well, and what you're describing is something I think many people in their own families have been experiencing here for the last 8 years, or probably even longer. I mean, Fox News, for instance, has been around since the 90s. But what you're describing is something that I think thousands of families have experienced, where they have loved ones that went down this rabbit hole and they never get back out, or it takes a long time for them to come back out. Do you think that people who have gone down the MAGA road, do you think that they can be ever, turned back? I sound like it's Star Wars. Can we turn Darth Vader back from the dark side?
Yeah.
But do you think some people can be reached?
I do. It's going to take a lot of patience and one-on-one conversations with that one person in their family or that one friend who can get to them. It's almost like you're deprogramming somebody. I mean, look, we know people who used to be Republican that aren't now. Like, one point, they just say enough is enough. I get it. But there are too many of those folks who genuinely think by voting Republican, they're saving a kid from being turned gay or some weird thing like that. These folks, there's no cure-all for it, unfortunately. I'm hoping time, as we move past this MAGA movement after November, I'm hoping time helps. But we know the rhetoric on the right is just getting more inflamed and more bizarre. And nobody at the top cares about the truth at all. So there's no checks and balance system for like, okay, how far are we going to let this go? So that's what scares me is even after, Trump loses in November, all the ideology is still out there. What happens to that? It's going to get sucked up somewhere, but where is the question? I don't know. I do think we do need to be talking to our MAGA family and friends. And I think listening is a big part of that. And if you can get into a conversation and not keep it from getting contentious, you have to keep it from getting contentious. Otherwise, you lose. But I think just asking these people simple questions that make them think critically in a way that they haven't before is going to be helpful also. I just don't know. I don't know. We'll have to talk to some psychologists about that.
Well, Gina, look, I know I've taken a lot of your time here, but before we go, can you just talk about the Point of Disorder podcast and, how it got started, your coworkers, and why you guys love doing it?
We started Point of Disorder earlier this year, and it's been so much fun. So it's myself, Julie Campbell-Bode, who is my co-founder at Distill Social, and Adrienne Pickett from Guerrilla Politic. And the three of us are just progressive ladies in Michigan who decided, you know what, let's start a podcast and gossip about, state and national politics. It's kind of the same conversations we would have if we're all just kind of like hanging out somewhere. Other ladies like to talk about different topics, but for us, when we get together, it's always like, have you seen or heard this shit? So yeah, give it a listen. We get on there, we have some fun, we spill some political tea and give you the inside scoop, and we just try to have a good time, and we pull a little pop culture into it from time to time.
Yes, you do. In fact, I think there was one episode that I really wanted you guys to continue talking about Bridgerton, and then you cut yourselves off. So it's like, no, keep going. I'm liking this. But no, it is a fantastic and stellar podcast that you guys release every week. So please, those of you listening, subscribe to the Point of Disorder podcast and give it a 5-star review. Like this podcast, its main goal is just trying to reach out to as many people out there throughout the state of Michigan and across the country, just to let people know, to let fellow progressives know that there are a lot of us out here who are fighting for the people while fighting against that MAGA movement here that we've been talking about.
Yeah, something we do on the podcast is, when we're making some of these TikTok videos where we're approaching these elected officials or, just out in the wild talking to people, we pull a lot of those clips and we'll play them on the podcast. For instance, I was doing this fun thing where I went for a job interview at the Susan B. Anthony Foundation. And if you know them, you know that they are extremely far right and anti-choice. So I wanted to see what they were talking about in relation to Michigan because they were hiring canvassers. So I took this phone call, and it was basically a job interview on the phone, and I recorded the call. And this woman is telling me how they're knocking 400,000 doors to tell people not to vote for Elissa Slotkin because she wants people to have post-birth abortions. And I'm like, are you kidding me? And I'm like, what is that? I'm trying to get her to explain what it is because it's not a thing. It simply doesn't exist. She was talking about late-term abortions, or I'm like, there were no facts. It was a fun conversation, and I recorded it and played it on the pod. And that's the kind of stuff you'll hear if you tune in to Point of Disorder.
If people like to learn more about Distill Social and follow what you guys are doing, and also maybe like to sign up and volunteer and join in your efforts, what can they do?
Yeah, and feel free to go on distillsocial.com if you like what we're doing. You can donate because, as Pat can attest to, podcasting doesn't pay.
No, that's right.
That's why I had to go for a second job at Susan B. Anthony.
All right. Well, Gina Keller, co-founder and digital director of Distill Social, and of course, co-host of the Point of Disorder podcast. Thank you so much for being on this week. Thanks so much for everything that you do, for all the hard work that you put in and week out. Because I have to tell you, Gina, it's great having people like you on the front lines for the progressive movement. So thanks for everything that you're doing, and take care of yourself. And hey, we'll talk after the election, okay?
Thank you, Pat.
A podcast that believes in using common sense to move Michigan into the future. And by common sense, we mean progressive sense. We've all seen what 40 years of Republican leadership did to this state, and we refuse to go back. It's Left of Lansing with Pat Johnston. You can follow Pat on Facebook or X, Pat still calls it Twitter, or on the Gram, Threads, and also on YouTube. Subscribe to the show on YouTube and wherever else you listen to your podcasts. All right, I think we gave Pat enough time to catch his breath. Let's get back to it. Here's Pat Johnston.
Great catching up there with Gina Keller. I'll provide links to Distill Social and to the Point of Disorder podcast. And again, you can get it wherever you listen to your podcast. And please make sure to subscribe and give it a 5-star review. And while I'm at it, please subscribe to this podcast and give it a 5-star review as well. And subscribe to Left of Lansing on YouTube. Don't forget about that. Subscriptions are very important for all of us, and it helps grow the audience. So please subscribe. And listen, if you believe this podcast only deserves a 4-star review, that's fine. I'll accept it. Just subscribe. Time now for the Left of Lansing Last Call. So, as I said at the beginning of the show, Elissa Slotkin will try to keep Debbie Stabenow's seat blue in the U.S. Senate when she takes on former Republican House clown, Florida, Mike Rogers. Now, I think Slotkin should use the weird trope against Rogers since he has suddenly flipped from being anti-Trump to pro-Trump and for leaving the state that he wants to represent. But there's something else that I've brought up here, but it needs reminding when it comes to Florida Mike Rogers, and that is he has no principles. He just cares about money. The Heartland Signal reports this week that Michigan Republican Senate candidate Florida Mike Rogers has been linked to several Saudi companies following his departure from Congress in 2015, in which he has personally gained from, including one with questionable nuclear ambitions. The story continues. Among these connections and his involvement with the telecommunications company Telefonica and the nuclear technology company IP3 International, both of which have significant ties to Saudi Arabia. For the past 7 years, Rogers has been a member of Telefonica's Technical and Security Advisory Committee, a company in which Saudi Telecom acquired a 10% stake to become its largest shareholder. Rogers also held a position on the board of IP3 International and its subsidiary called Allied Nuclear, according to his financial disclosures filed last December. So it appears that Florida Mike was hoping to make some cash through his connections with this IP3 International. The story says that IP3 wanted the Trump administration to grant approval back in 2019 to transfer nuclear technology to Saudi Arabia without it having to follow safeguards against uranium enrichment. What? Now, many industry officials expressed some deep concerns about this agreement between IP3 and Saudi Arabia and called it a boondoggle for those within the company. And an internal company email revealed it was alleged that former national security officials, including Florida Mike Rogers, were promised $1 million for each nuclear reactor sold to Saudi Arabia. And Heartland Signal reminds us that despite Florida Mike's anti-China rhetoric, he worked for a Chinese tech company and made some good money there as well. This is on top of the money he made while in Florida as a defense contractor. Once again, Florida Mike got rich from the government he says that he despises. This guy is not only weird, but he has zero principles. He doesn't care about Michigan. He's only cared about enriching his pocketbook, and he'll do it at our expense. And that way, he is very, very Trumpian. My. How things can change, right, Florida Mike? Oh, man, America first. Come on.
You're listening to the Left of Lansing podcast. The music you're hearing is by Wander Beats. To hear the latest project, check out Space Leopard on your favorite streaming site. Now back to our favorite progressive voice in Michigan. It's Pat Johnston.
Well, that's going to do it for this edition of The Left of Lansing. Remember, you can always contact me throughout the week at leftoflansing@gmail.com. Special thanks to Gina Keller from Distill Social. And remember, follow Distill Social on TikTok, the Gram, Facebook, and Twitter. They put out some great content each and every day to keep us aware of what's happening in Michigan and across the country. And check out their videos of Kamala Harris and Tim Walz campaigning in Romulus this week. And can you believe it? The Detroit Lions had their first preseason game this week. Look, I love summer, but I think I'm getting ready for some football. And I'm getting ready to bring you another solid and entertaining edition of Michigan's premier progressive podcast next week. Until then, take the battle to them. Thank you, Michigan.
The Left of Lansing podcast was produced by Pat Johnston. Written by Pat Johnston. Researched by Pat Johnston. Edited by Pat Johnston. And hosted by, yes, Pat Johnston. Technical assistance by Dr. Heather. And thanks to our good friend Kirsten for the awesome podcast logo. Remember to visit leftoflansing.com for more news and information. Thanks again for listening to the Left of Lansing podcast.